Richard will share his screen as soon as he comes back online. Seems to be some issue. Yeah, he's restarting Firefox. We'll share slides shortly. Good evening or good morning. It's 2 a.m. Where I am in Helsinki. So welcome everyone to IETF 111. So third session of the first day. Hopefully you had productive meetings in the prior two sessions. I'm still waiting for Richard to share the screen before we can get started. By the way, this is being recorded, just FYI. I'll repeat this again when we are going over the slides. Still waiting for Richard to share the slides. Let's. Otherwise, I can also open them here and just get started. Good to see you, Richard. Hopefully things are sorted out now.
Can't hear you, Richard.
Audio.
Richard, try again.
I'm pulling up the slides.
It's good now.
I had to. Yeah, there was some delay in it starting. I'm loading the slides, about to try sharing again. Thanks to macOS security features, I had to restart Firefox to enable sharing. So let me see here. All right, is that visible to folks?
Yep. If you can make them full screen.
Let's see. I tried, but it doesn't appear to be working. So I think we may just get.
Do you think I should? Maybe I'll just.
Can you do it, Mohit, or do you want me to try?
Go ahead, Kathleen. Maybe you can give it a try. Yeah.
It would take me a few extra minutes, but I will try.
Okay. Well, sorry for the delay, folks. I guess you see my slides in full screen. I'll get started. I don't want to cause any more delays. We are already 4 minutes behind our schedule. So good evening, good morning. Welcome everyone to IETF 111. This is Secdispatch. let's get started. So hopefully you have seen the note well already a couple of times, but still it's good to remember that we are governed by these best current practices. Hopefully many of you are familiar with them now, but if not, please go and have a look at them. By the way, I'm Mohit, one of the co-chairs, and together with Richard and Kathleen, we chair Secdispatch, so we'll be at your service for the next couple of hours. As I stated before, this session is being recorded, so here's some useful rules to help you along the meeting. Make sure the video is turned off and mute your microphone unless you're speaking. As you see, I'm using headphones, and I recommend all of you to do the same as well. Thankfully, the blue sheets are now generated automatically, so you don't need to do anything with that. We also have Jabber, and I think one of the co-chairs will be monitoring the chat and bringing your questions forward if you don't want to unmute or show your video yourself. There's some more useful links if you need help with how to join the meeting and if you need some assistance. More links. So the slides are all, for most of the presentations, the slides are already uploaded and available in the materials. We are still missing a couple of slides. I tried to ping the authors a couple of times, but haven't received their slides yet. I see them in the participant list. I guess they'll share their screen just for them to know that we need your slides in any case, because they need to be archived in the meeting materials. So please do send us your slides or upload them directly to Data Tracker. We'll be taking meeting minutes, brief meeting minutes, and Russ has kindly volunteered to help us within minutes. But if there is anyone else who wants to help along Russ, please feel free to do so. It is really appreciated. We don't really want like detailed meeting minutes, but it's important to capture important decisions or conclusions we arrive at in the meeting. I already introduced the co-chairs. We have a mailing list and a charter. So maybe some ground rules that you should know. This working group doesn't adopt documents. It only recommends next steps. And that's what we are going to do with all the drafts that are presented today. We have several possible outcomes. So we could direct a draft to an existing working group. We could suggest forming a new working group and going through a BOF. If that's needed, we could also request our ADs, Ben Keduk and Roman Danilou, to sponsor the draft. We could also just say that more discussion is needed, or then the last possible outcome is that IETF should not work on this topic at all. So when you're at the mic and giving comments, it's very nice for the authors to receive technical feedback, but for us, the chairs, it's also important to get feedback on what do you see as the potential outcome. Some more, if you haven't used Meet Echo before, here's some useful links and pointers on how you can join the queue, share your audio, and show your hand or raise your hand if you want to join the queue. So all right, this is our agenda for today. We moved it around a little bit based on the availability of authors, and some of the presentations were already presented elsewhere, so we decided to move them down the order. Does anyone want to bash the agenda? Huh? I guess going once, going twice. We can start with TLS 1.3 transport model for SNMP v3. Ken, I didn't receive your slides. They are not in the meeting materials. Do you want to share your screen and present them directly? But please do remember to send us your slides. In any case, we need to upload them to the data tracker. All right, I'll let you share your screen and get started.
Yes. So here on my screen, and I did send an email.
We hear you, but very faintly. Could you speak a bit louder? It's
Sure.
still very faint.
Let me see if I can. Is there a way to edit the volume? Is that any better?
It is a little bit better, yes.
Let me see if I can set my settings over here. Output, input. At max volume, so I will just try to speak loud. um, so I did send.
We still don't see your slides.
You should see them now. Yes.
I don't know if others can see it, but at least I just see a screen share is being started. So
Yes, I see the same.
okay, so maybe you can like request it again. Oh, now we see. Yeah, now we see your PowerPoint. Maybe you want to make it full screen.
Yes, there we go.
Excellent. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so, and I did send you a copy of these a little while ago. Sorry for the delay on that. But I am a consultant under contract to the US DOT, so Department of Transportation.
Can't hear at all.
Okay. I am a consultant to the Department of Transportation in the US, and they are asking me to present this today to try to integrate SNMP and TLS 1.3. The current version of 6353 is based on TLS 1.2, and there is one significant problem that does not allow it to be used with the new DTLS 1.3. So we'll review those changes and then discuss the path forward after we give a little bit of background of how we use SNMP. It is our primary protocol for ITS field devices, for both center-to-field and field-to-field communications within the US, and it is also used fairly extensively, probably the most common approach internationally. It includes safety critical data, so it's certainly something that we should be securing properly with most recent standards. This includes signal controllers, electronic signage you might see on the freeway, various types of sensors, highway lighting, ramp meters, and other devices. According to CISA, we should be using SNMP v3.
Okay, so excuse me.
Yes.
So people are still having a very difficult time. I can hear you, but lightly. And so some of the people are wondering, they just can't hear at all. They're wondering if your settings are set to your computer and not your headset. So I don't know if maybe you could bring your computer closer in case that's the mic that's in use. No.
No. Let me see if I can switch to my computer mic instead.
Or is it set for your car? And maybe that's why it's so light? Is your car running?
Nope. My car's
Okay. Okay.
I think, would it maybe be good to move to the next presentation while we so allow our presenters some time to work out audio issues?
Okay.
Okay. So Mohit, I don't have the agenda. Who is up next on the agenda?
That's me. This is Mallory.
Okay, great.
I'm ready to go.
I can pull up your slides, or you can drive them as you like.
I can do it. I just asked.
Okay. Okay,
Thanks.
great. Looks like it's starting.
All set.
Thanks. We hear you loud and clear.
Grills. Okay. So you should see those. Hey, so I've got this draft. It's been discussed a bit in MLS on the mailing list. I presented it at the last interim. So for those of you that were at the last MLS interim, these slides are going to look very familiar. But we have had an update since then, so I'll move on. Let's see. Great. Yeah, so we have a slew of authors. A couple are in the room. So Olaf and Sophia, I'm going to welcome them to jump in. I don't know if Fred and Gershabat are here, but yeah, we've been working on this draft since, I guess, February, earlier this year. And the goal of it is just to expand existing documentation that defines end-to-end encrypted communications from a few different perspectives to try to get as complete and coherent a definition as possible. We don't want to be verbose. At the same time, especially the RFCs, but other things out there tend to not, I think, do a sufficient job of explaining exactly what an end-to-end encrypted system is. So the things that we're hoping for with this draft, but that maybe you don't see explicitly in the text, but this is sort of the, I don't know if you want to call it the ulterior motives. We want to make sure that things that are not end-to-end encryption can't just be called it. So I've seen in the press even things that, you know, it's like an end-to-end encrypted system that has key escrow or whatever. I mean, it's like, don't worry, it's still end-to-end encrypted. We want to be able to make sure that there's a clear definition from an authority, and the IETF is the best one I can think of that has it well defined, such that sort of thing isn't possible. Another outcome that we've realized would be very helpful to messaging layer security working group is that we could draft this in parallel to its other drafts, such that it could potentially be a place where other definitions live as well. So that sort of definitional work doesn't have to muck up some of the other, the protocol draft and the architecture draft. And then the last one is that it possibly can help demystify or just complement some of the implementations out there of end-to-end encrypted systems by setting a norms and principles driven approach to what it is people are trying to achieve when they make encrypted messaging apps. So things that we don't want to do with this draft, we're actively and consciously, intentionally avoiding, just so that folks don't come to the mic and suggest these things. We don't want to say what it isn't explicitly. We want to make it sure it's a proactive definition. It also, we would like in that same vein to avoid invoking threats or on-path attacks even, or, you know, it should be able to stand on its own is what we're hoping. And also, you know, as much as possible, there's been a lot of agreement about what constitutes end-to-end encryption and implicitly then what it isn't. But I think having sort of very public, and IETF is public, its lists and its meetings are on YouTube, like Discord and disagreement about the finer points would possibly do, you know, more damage than good. So if there's you know, sort of view that IETF can't agree on what end-to-end encryption is, that would be a bad external view. So we're trying to avoid that. In general, I'm going to get into the specifics now. That it's broken into 3 parts. We started with the first section was really succinct. It was just trying to attempt a formal definition based on the constituent parts of the end-to-end principle in encryption. But we realized that actually quite a bit of the work we're going to end up doing on this draft lies in the definition of what an end is for a variety of important reasons. So we've now broken that out into the formal definition piece, talks about end, then it talks about end-to-end principle, and then lastly it defines encryption. And again, formal definition just means we're trying to like succinctly summarize things that are already out there with few words, crisply, etc. The second one, the second section, we felt would be a useful thing to actually talk about the features of an end-to-end encrypted system and the requirements from a development and design perspective, which I think is where you would talk about things like perfect forward secrecy or you know, anonymity and that sort of thing. And then the last section, which I really am glad we have, is also what a user would expect. So trying to, as best we can, match what is a meaningful understanding of an end-to-end encrypted system's guarantees for users as a way of defining it. So we think that these 3 sections maybe approach the way to define a technology separately, but in aggregate, as a whole, they might constitute a full definition. And so, yeah, the changes, so it's in its, what, 3rd version now? Yeah, I mentioned already that the first revision we had to make was to get a lot more specific about endpoint, and that was feedback that came from a variety of places. It probably still needs a bit more work. And then the last one that I uploaded the day of the doc freeze was a few edits on the text, which are really greatly appreciated. We also were talking about how cryptography or cryptographers use sort of functional definitions in the formal definition, so that is there now. It's a pointer at the moment, so it's sort of short and summarized text that points to work that Chelsea's doing on it that elaborates a lot more. And I think that's actually okay. I think maybe one of the functions of this draft is to try to pull in what we think are really good attempts at definitions to sort of catalog those and point to them. And then the last thing, again, yeah, we tried to further break out what constitutes an end by also linking it to identity, which could be a really useful thing also for the architecture of group chats, given how those are the protocol works for those. So this is where we're going with it. We want to incorporate more feedback in some of the list traffic. So I appreciate there have been some really deep reviews. I'm not satisfied that we've addressed all of those, but we've documented them as best we can in the GitHub issue tracker. I think we probably need, in the second section that goes through the features and requirements, to give more thorough definitions. And I know that Sophia, it's one thing that she's worked on. There was another piece around how metadata maybe needs to, as in we know that we can't necessarily solve the metadata problem and then that there will always be metadata, but the idea that a best practice in designing end-to-end encrypted system is to try to reduce that, and how to sort of explain in a definitional sense that trajectory. Because if we, again, like trying to think of the possible threats to end-to-end encrypted systems, one of those is like enhancing metadata. And so we just, I think, want to figure out how we can basically say that, metadata reduction is like compatible with, secure end-to-end encrypted systems. And then, yeah, we'd like to add in more ideas, more features, such as like forward secrecy and backwards security. So to the dispatch question, like I said, we've been talking about this in MLS. At the last interim, folks seemed receptive to it in the ways that we were sort of aligning with the work that they're already doing, but made the very helpful suggestion that we should come to Secdispatch at this meeting and talk about if that shouldn't be elsewhere, because it does touch on potentially other work at the IETF. So there's stuff in OpenPGP, for example, LAMPs, things like that. So yeah, I'm curious if folks want to weigh in on that and your thoughts on that. So that's why we're here. This is where you can find the issue tracker and that sort of thing. So I think I'm going to stop there, but I would like to, just before we go on, I always have to like scroll the chat because I'm busy, talking and forwarding my slides. So I'm going to scroll the chat. If my co-authors that are here want to jump in, please do. Otherwise, people, I prefer you come to the mic and ask me, but.
Yeah, so it looks like Daniel is in the queue. So DKG, do you want to go ahead?
Bill was ahead of me in the queue, but I'm happy to go now. So this is definitely relevant outside of MLS. I said in the chat that I've been struggling with this with some of the work I'm doing in LAMPs. In LAMPs, I've found for the header protection work that we actually are not talking about end-to-end encryption, but we're talking about end-to-end cryptographic protections. just because we do care also about things like signed-only messages and the end-to-end security that the signed messages give for people who check signatures. So the fact that this is end-to-end encryption, I know that the general, if we're talking about terminology for the general press, they're not going to get that nuance. They say encryption when they mean cryptographic protections. But for those of us who are discussing specific guarantees we expect to have, encryption is a little bit too narrow. I recognize that Alex's note said end-to-end secure messaging, which may also mean encryption. But anyway, there's a bunch of different ways to phrase it, and I don't know whether the goal here is to shift generic conversation outside of the IETF or to shift to IETF conversation. But yeah, it is definitely relevant. I don't know where to put it.
If I could just respond to the point about secure messaging or whatever, I think that's one of the examples of internal to the technical community conflict that I think can be very counterproductive, because if I'm a user and I'm trying to figure out what is better for my privacy and security and my confidential communications, and there's two sorts of ideas out there. There's one that's called private messaging, and then there's another one that's called end-to-end encryption. And potentially, depending on the definitions, depending on how, the various proposals out there to potentially have like lawful access to one of those things, or, we sort of compromise on one of them, it's going to be hard for me as a user to remember which is which. It's going to be hard to feel like, oh yeah, I heard that, this app, does this thing, or like, they can, it's secure, but like they can actually kind of get access if they need to. But then the other one I heard about like is really, really secure. I mean, we already have that, right? We already have an ecosystem where users aren't always secure, or like aren't always sure about the security they're being offered. So I feel like I really appreciate Alex's effort. But I think that trying to call it something else or kind of trying to come up with other terminology may not be that helpful. I think we should try to stick to strengthening the definition that we're already sort of ubiquitously using.
We have 3 more people in the queue, and we're going to try to go quickly because we're getting very close to the end of the 20 minutes. So, Philip, do you want to go ahead, please? B.
I think it needs to go to a working group. I think I would prefer LAMPS over MLS, simply because LAMPS already has a cross-section of multiple working group products in its scope rather than just one. The other point I'd like to make is I think that we should look beyond just communication security and also look at data at rest security, which is what I've been focused on. And the thing is, in the preamble, you said you can't escrow the keys and be end-to-end secure. Well, actually, if you're going to do data at rest security, you had better have a key escrow story, or else if the user loses their keys, well, it's a ransomware attack on themselves. And so, yeah, there's a lot of complexity. It's going to need a lot of discussion, but I would like to have that data at rest in scope as well, because that's what I work on.
I think that's great. I think that that's an important component of end-to-end encryption. Even if we were talking about a scenario like MLS or encrypted messaging apps, like there's a storage problem. If you share any resources whatsoever in those group chats, if you do have like key recovery, those are hard problems, and they've been like the hard problems of end-to-end encryption have informed the way we wrote the second section in particular. So thanks for that.
Great, thank you. Mohit?
So I would kind of echo what Stephen was saying in the chat. I think we are underestimating how much work it would be to, sorry, first I should preface by saying I'm speaking as an individual contributor and not as a chair. So I think we are grossly underestimating how much work it would be if we want to make it like more general definition beyond MLS, because I don't think users are always the end. So when I talk like to a server, one of the endpoints there isn't any user, and like having this discussion with people in the past, like we don't seem to have any sort of agreement on what an end is, because it keeps on evolving. Before it used to be a box like a server, now everything is virtualized. It used to be virtual machines or the operating system, then it used to be the apps running on the operating system, and we never seem to agree even within like one organization or colleagues that what the endpoint ever refers to, since it evolves over time. So either we keep it like focused on MLS, where the ends most likely are some users and not involve servers, and then even with servers things get more complicated because there might be CDNs on the path. Is the endpoint the CDN, or is the endpoint the origin server? So since I had laid the ground rules of also recommending where to do this, I don't think LAMPS or MLS is the best place to do this. I would rather say like this should be done in SAG, and when the document is mature enough, if we get to that stage, ask one of our ADs to sponsor it. But yeah, I'll stop here.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for posting this. By the way, for you're still sending video. I mean, I think I sent a review, which of course I did like 10 minutes ago, so nobody's had a chance to read. I mean, I think that something in this space is a good idea. I think definitely having some definition is helpful. I feel like maybe this is maybe this has a bit of a scope creep problem. I think, it seems to me like there are two kind of layers here. One is defining like what end-to-end means as a conceptual point, which I think you sort of do in 3.1 and some of your comments earlier, and then it's sort of trying to map the concept of end-to-end onto specific application settings. So I mean, the example I gave is, like when I read my Gmail, my like TLS connection is end-to-end encrypted to Google, but the email was not end-to-end encrypted to you, right? And so I think, it sounds to me like you mostly want to focus on like you're trying to focus on this MLS setting. I think there's an adjacent setting, as people pointed out, in terms of secure messaging, and there's some like less adjacent settings, like like channel security, even further out electronic voting, stuff like that. So I guess what I would suggest is try to like focus on maybe maybe can we like start by like, trying to have a sort of like, as I say, a sort of 3.1 definition, and then to be like, okay, now let's like actually get quite concrete and map it onto messaging, and maybe some pieces of Alex document can be useful there. It's unfortunate that we have like one in CFRG and one here. I don't mean that like they were each like being done, but it's just the presentations aren't like overlapping. And then if that makes progress, then we can be like, okay, well now let's try to solve like tackling these other ones. So I think that would be maybe helpful. In terms of like location, SOG really isn't set up for this kind of work. Frankly, we don't really have like a place for this kind of work. CFRG is a little bit the closest, but also not quite the thing. So I'm not sure what to suggest. I'm kind of hoping, I'm like going to keep vamping for a second and hope that like Roman or Ben steps in and actually suggests something. Because I think like this is valuable, but we don't like have the kind of like structures to do the work.
Oh, thanks very much for that review, Ecker, and for the comments. I don't actually have any direct responses, so go ahead, Richard.
Great. I cut the queue, so Richard's last.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I was just basically, I got up to say to disagree with Mo, but I ended up agreeing with Ecker. I think there is a definition to be had here. It's not totally ambiguous, but I think it does have those layers that Ecker mentioned. I think there's like a general abstract layer where it's about kind of authorization and only the authorized endpoints being part of the transaction, but it specializes differently when you're talking about like the HTTPS connection to Gmail or the email transaction. So yeah, I think that layered approach is about right. And I will yield the floor to Roman to talk about where this should go.
Nice segue. Yeah, I've been waiting for all the folks to queue up at the mic before jumping in. I think what we want this document to be really determines the home. If we're really going to try to tie it to something that's a little closer to use cases, I think we can find a working group. I mean, if it's messaging, maybe it's Lamps. I mean, maybe it's MLS. But if we want a more general purpose thing, the only route I think sadly is an AD kind of sponsored thing. I haven't, had a chance to really talk it through with Ben, but from my perspective, to be able to get to AD sponsor, we would need to figure out the shape a little bit better to make sure we're bounding it. There's definitely good things kind of in here, but as I saw future work and everyone talking about the mic, they're all great ideas, but we need a cutoff point to say, the box is only going to be this small, and then perhaps we need additional drafts. And I think that would be the trick we would need to AD sponsor or to make the decision to go in a working group.
Thank you all for your feedback. I think I want to get to Ben, but I just wanted to reiterate, this is why I try to spend a lot of time on outcomes, like what we want from this. And that may be where we go back to actually make decisions about scope and what we're trying to achieve with it, and then where it lands. Because I agree, it shouldn't get too big, but if it's in scope because it'll achieve the outcomes of definition erosion and that sort of thing, then I think we should do it. We'll just have to be really, really concise about it so it's not terribly long and hard to understand.
Yeah, I just want to jump in to basically agree with Roman. There's a lot, it seems like there's a lot more discussion left to figure out what scope we actually want. There's a lot of good topics that I heard in the presentation. I tend to agree with Eckert that the document as it currently stands, you might benefit from cutting down, restructuring, something like that. But I think that there's definitely going to need to be more discussion before we can try to adopt this or think about a working group. Like, if we were going to say we were going to try and make a working group, I don't think we know what the working group charter would be. So it seems like we need to figure out just where we're going to do the continued discussion on this. I'm happy to make a new mailing list for this if we want to. We find a different home for it.
Only question is I want to have more discussion. I'd love to work with area director on this, but just where?
Yeah,
probably easiest is a Disney list. Go ahead.
Yeah, the new mailing list idea had come to my mind as well. I think that sounds like a good outcome. It sounds like we have a few folks here who are interested enough to sign up for that and engage in that discussion. So if there are no objections to that, I think I would propose we call that our dispatch outcome. With the idea that once things get refined and advanced a little bit, it could come back as something that would run through a working group or AD sponsorship.
So I think you're fine, Richard. You look confused. So why don't we line up the next speaker?
So Kenneth, I think you had told me in chat that you were had your audio issues. You thought better. Do you want to do a quick sound check and see if we want to go back to your presentation?
Okay, is this any better?
That sounds good to me.
Okay. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay. So let me just briefly go back. This is a SNMP is used heavily within intelligent transportation, both in the US and internationally. It is used for sensitive devices, including signal controllers, electronic signage, various types of sensors.
We don't see your screen still.
Those.
And I don't know if you want to also share your video. That's up to you, but at least we don't see your slides.
Now, in order to get my mic working, I had to switch out my Wait, do you have my email with the slides?
Sure, I have uploaded them to the data tracker. I can share them from my
Okay,
my
thank you.
machine. No, no worries.
Sorry for confusion.
And if you want to, if you can start, we are going to run short on time from all of this. So, okay,
Sure.
great.
Okay, if you go on to the next slide. So this is being used heavily within the intelligent transport industry, both within the US as a primary standard and internationally as in several other countries as well. It is related to an international standards organization or ISO standard. So on to the next slide. So it is used for a variety of field devices, some of which are sensitive information, such as signal controllers that we relate to safety of travel. Go on to the next slide. It is, of course, this a guidance to use the latest security standards. That guidance currently was TLS 1.2. Obviously, we want to update that to 1.3. And that breaks RFC 6353. It's the fingerprint that breaks. So go on to the next slide. Our potential solution is we can either migrate to an alternative protocol. Some certainly have suggested that, although we've had that discussion within the transportation industry. There is strong consensus that we should keep using SNMP. It is the quickest, easiest change, and it actually meets our needs better than most of the other options that have been suggested. So the idea is then to update RFC 6353. That's currently not being addressed in the IETF, and we are proposing that it become a new work item there. And we're certainly interested in working with the IETF to do this. We recognize we could develop our own standard to do that same thing, but it makes a lot more sense to work with the IETF to do this. So that is our proposal. On to the next slide. We have drafted a preliminary that has my name on it that was distributed in advance of this meeting. Next slide. And next slide. So the quick overview of the changes that are needed. As mentioned before, this is all driven by the fact that the 1.3 update uses a 2-octet cipher suite rather than a 1-octet hash algorithm. That changes the fingerprint algorithm defined by RFC 6353, and we are proposing to update that. There's some other minor clarifications being made, and as a part of this is clarifying that authentication and privacy will always be provided now, because that's just part of 1.3, and we will update references. Next slide. There are also some subjective changes. We're prohibiting the use of 0 RTT mode, recommending disabling USM, mandating some previous recommendations, and some other subjective kind of non-changes of we're going to be using the same port numbers as what our recommendation is. All of that is, of course, subject to discussions in a working group, assuming that this is approved as an IETF work item. Next slide. So that brings us to the path forward, and really that comes down to, is the IETF interested? Next slide. So our proposal is that this would become a standards track update. Of course, there are other options, but it seems appropriate for us that this would be a true standard to receive the broadest consensus. Next slide. And the other question that really is at play is, should we treat this as a complete replacement of RFC 6353 or simply an update to RFC 6353? The first draft that we sent out, 00, removed support for DTLS, That was some early discussions based on the fact that DTLS 1.3 was still in a draft state. As DTLS 1.3 neared completion, we decided to go ahead and include that as well. That actually simplified the changes quite a bit. So draft 01 became just an update, which is what we're currently recommending. Most of the document now is actually the updated MIB that includes the RFC fingerprint update, but there's still another 8 pages or so of other details. So that is the presentation, and I'm happy to hear comments and what people's thoughts are.
Thank you. Eric is first in queue.
So I think this seems like generally important work, and obviously I think that if we're going to update a standards track document, we should have another standards track document. Probably you are going to need some kind of working group, unless there's I don't think there's an existing SNMP group hanging around anymore. But it should be relatively modest. I do want to I don't want to get too far into technical details, but you lost me a little bit in the fingerprint thing, because in 1.2 also and things were complicated, but the hash algorithms were sort of identified in the cipher suite as part of the cipher suite, and there was a separate identifier for the signature algorithms. And that's the same thing here too, except we just didn't decouple the hash and the signature. So perhaps this isn't quite the right answer to this question, but it certainly does seem like it at least cross out 1.2 and write 1.3 everywhere. So there will be some work to do. I'll try to read the instance of comments. I don't think we have to litigate this fingerprint question here. That's probably not helpful.
Okay, so Rich Love.
I agree with Ecker. This should be a standards track document somewhere. It should be a complete doc, because the security folks who are going to look at it probably aren't very familiar with 6353, so don't do a patch or a diff document. Make a self-contained full thing. And yeah, I don't know where it happens, but it should definitely be some kind of working group. Thank you.
Anyone else for the queue? Roman?
Roman, I distinguished AD.
SNMP is, our protocol. We really should maintain it. The question is, we're seeing in the chat window is, where is there the remaining body of knowledge on SNMP? Because we can bring the TLS expertise to them. And if folks have ideas on where that is, we're all ears. My gut reaction in talking with Ben was, well, UTA is the place where we do protocol updates that can patch TLS on top of it. But it's not clear that there's SNMP experience there.
Yeah, UTA seems like a pretty plausible point to me. The other alternative that came to my mind was just forming a small focus working group just for this. It doesn't seem like this probably has a whole lot of overlap with other work in UTA, which I think might guide against that. But I don't think this is a real. I agree that seems like work it should be done either in. I think UTA seems like a fine suggestion for an existing working group, or in a small focus working group that's specifically for this.
Ben also would like to speak.
Yes. So I think that it's a little unfortunate that we have this combination of sort of needing to update to be TLS 1.3 compatible, and then also having other changes we want to make that are more specific to SNMP3. If it was just the TLS 1.3 updates, that I think would be quite straightforward, and we'd find people to review that very easily. And it's the addition of the other SNMP stuff that would make this a little bit more challenging. And so, on the whole, I would lean towards a dedicated working group, but I'm not really tied to that.
discussion, it seems like we may have a couple of working groups that aren't in SEC that we're speaking for and the expertise. Maybe what we do is we take this offline, talk with some of our AD peers to say, maybe they can kind of help us and we could bring the TLS expertise if needed. And if that doesn't turn out to be an option, we would suggest a small focused working group.
That sounds like a pretty good plan to me. Other Secdispatch chairs or ADs have thoughts on that, or folks from the floor?
I guess we'll dispatch it somewhere, but we are not sure yet where. So maybe that's the conclusion from this discussion.
Yeah, I think the conclusion I was coming away with was that we would dispatch it to the ADs to figure out in partnership with the ops ADs whether it makes sense to do a new working group or to dispatch somewhere existing. But in any case, one of those two outcomes to be determined by the ADs.
Right, that's what that was what I was proposing stated more eloquently. We'll take the homework assignment and then in the last resort would be to propose a new focused working group.
Sounds good. Richard, should we stop here and move to the next presentation?
Yeah, I think we're good. So thanks for that presentation, Kenneth. Sorry about the tools issues.
All right, thank you.
All right, next up, I think we have Jerome on opportunistic wireless encryption.
How do you want to do it, Jerome? Should I share your slides or are you going to share your screen?
I see Jerome in the participant list, but I do not hear him.
So I had dropped for a minute, and at the time that I dropped, we were over 100 people in the room. Now we're down to 83, so it might be that people are rejoining.
Nope, I see 98, so. Or should we then move to Renee? I think we can move to the next presentation. I don't, now Jerome is in the.
Yeah, apologies, I got disconnected. I don't know if you were speaking to me.
Yeah, do you want to share your screen and present?
Absolutely, yes, yes. Apologies for the delay. I wasn't sure if you were talking to me or someone else.
No worries.
Ooh.
We see your screen and we do hear you fine, so please go ahead.
All right, thank you very much, and good morning for those of you for whom it's at 3 a.m. almost. So thank you for giving us the opportunity to present this. I will not turn on my. I can maybe try to turn on my camera, see if I do not destroy too much the experience. All right. So this draft that we posted is about OWE. So OWE is opportunistic wireless encryption, and that was defined in SAG in RFC 8110. So that was back in 2017. That was the completion of the draft. It went on, I think, for 2.5 years. So what the draft was, what the document was about, was to provide an encryption mechanism for unauthenticated Wi-Fi. So back then, you imagine you go to a mom and pop shop, you either have the choice to have your pre-shared key, which is highly insecure because everybody has it. It's on a post-it note in the view of everybody. More complex method like hotspot 2.0, 802.11u were too complicated. .1x, all these things were way too complicated. So people resorted to nothing, and nothing was not really good. So what RFC 8110 is described a mode by which there is a Diffie-Hellman key exchange between the client and the access point, which allows the two to create a secure connection by which they can protect their communication from you. So that was an RFC 8110. It was defined here in the IETF. And then, of course, it was using some mechanism from the IEEE 802.11 working group, in particular the key exchange beyond the initial association, etc. This method was defined for a single access point you connect to, because the idea of the draft, as we read it multiple times, was you go to this mom and pop shop. That draft was in fact very successful because RFC 8110, once adopted, became part of a larger structure in the Wi-Fi Alliance, which is LPAV3. And we foresee that this standard is going to become very common, including in places where you have more than one access point. We're thinking here, small shopping malls, small airports, places where you may have maybe 5, 10, maybe 20 access points, where they go into the same ID where they say, we don't want a pre-shared key, we don't want a hotspot too complicated, we don't want .1x, of course. So we're going to do open, and some of them do today. If you went through places like San Jose in California airports, you've seen, open type of network, which, is highly insecure. But in Wi-Fi, in 802.11, that same problem happens, and there was a solution that was found a while back. Back in the early days of Wi-Fi as well, the communication was only thought between an access point and a client. But then in 2008, the 802.11 group defined what was called, the amendment 802.11r, also called 11r, or fast transition FT for the friends. And that augments 802.11 in a few ways. One of them is that access points can communicate in the background over what we call the distribution system, the DS, and share a common domain name. So now the access points can advertise that they have all that same domain name, and then the station knows that all these APs communicate in the background. And then instead of having a secure negotiation with one AP at a time, what FT does is allow you to have a sort of hierarchical structure where you have a main pre-shared key, PMK, sorry, that is generic to the ensemble that we call PMR0. And there is a key which is specific to each access point. And what FT defines is a way for that mechanism to be enhanced so that when you move from one AP to the other, you don't have to renegotiate everything from scratch. Without FT, you move from one AP to the other. Of course, you have to discover the next access point, but you also have to renegotiate the keys, and that can cost a lot of time. And that time, may be valuable when you do some things which are close to real time. So that mechanism allows you to pre-negotiate these keys while you're still associated to the access points you first joined. And the way that works is twofold. You can either go through that old AP and say, hey, I'm detecting AP number 2. Can you connect me with that AP so that I can negotiate key with that AP? Or you can go directly to that AP number 2 and say, hey, I'm having this PM key R0 and I'm coming from AP1. Can you please, use the background communication to establish a preset key with me? And you do all that while you're still connecting and associated to the first AP. And then as soon as you need to move rapidly to the next AP, you have already the key established, so you can, roam faster. However, that mechanism that FT defined in 2008 applies to the 802.11 mode. It does not apply to OWE, and that is because OWE was defined here at the IETF. However, we see that with the expansion of OWE adoption in places where there are more than one AP, we also see more and more use cases where people will have to want to have a secure association to more than one AP as they move. And there are multiple use cases, and in the beginning of the draft you'll see a few of those. You do ranging, you want those ranging to be secure. There's a new standard which allows you to look for a broadcast video, you want that communication to be secure, etc. So there are plenty of use cases where you will want this protection mechanism, excuse me, without necessarily wasting time between access points. So our proposal is to expand RFC 8110 by adding a layer of fast transition of 11R, so to speak, on it. The draft proposes that. Essentially, the process is that the choreography that was defined in RFC 8110 with this pre-connection at association phase, where you have this a public key exchange will stay the same, but we would add a sort of structure on top of which we'll have these FT topics, this domain name structure, this hierarchical name of keys, so that you can negotiate an OWE security between one AP and one station and multiple APs, and therefore have this fast roaming. So the question is, where do we define that stuff? It's very much 802.11. So we thought of going to 802.11, but again, OWE does not define over there. So there are other mechanisms over there, but not OWE. There is also the Wi-Fi Alliance, where OWE is strongly adopted. But again, their idea is that OWE is defined at the IETF. So we came to you guys to have your view and see if you think that the IETF would be a good vehicle to define this extension of RFC 8110 to add this FT layer. Let me pause there, pointing you to the draft to get comments and questions.
Great, thank you. So we have Richard Barnes first in the queue.
Yeah, I'd like to just pick up on that point you raised last. Is kind of why I'd be interested to know why folks think this is IETF work. Clearly, we did 8110 as an IETF published document, but it's not, looking at that document, it's not clear to me why that was done in the IETF. So this seems much more naturally done in either IEEE or Wi-Fi Alliance. Both of those organizations can obviously cross-reference to IETF stuff. So it doesn't seem to me like this requires obviously kind of internet expertise that the IETF is really core at. So maybe I see Dan next in the queue, so maybe you can shed some light on how 8110 got done.
You want to go ahead, Dan, or you want to go ahead, Dan, if that's okay?
Yeah, okay, thanks. So 8110 was done in the IETF because I tried to do it in .11, but some people are kind of persnickety, and they objected to the unauthenticated nature of OWE. That said, I think you really should at least try to get it pushed through .11. That's really the natural home for this. I noticed that you have no IANA considerations, but you do have a TBD in your document, and that TBD is going to have to get filled by IEEE. So I think you should really, before you ask IETF to dispatch this, you should at least try and get it pushed through .11.
So thank you, Dan. And we did. And unfortunately, 802.11 has another mechanism which is called PASN. And the feedback we got was, why would we define in IEEE something that was defined in the IETF? Well, we have in IEEE a mechanism which is not the same, but can pretty much maybe do the same job. So, PASN FT is maybe a way for the IEEE, but OWE being defined in the IETF. And if there is an option by the Wi-Fi Alliance, which is also not IEEE, this is where you guys should bring it, so that we got back here.
Thank you. So I think we have Eric Rescorla.
Yeah, hi. I share Richard's concerns here. I mean, it seems like I understand that we have 8110, but it's not like a standard stock document. It was just AD sponsored, and what you're telling me actually is right. You're telling me that IEEE is like, we have this thing, so we don't want to do yours. Like, that's really not a good reason to do things at IETF. It's like quite the opposite. It's a bad reason to do things at IETF. And I don't really think 8110 is precedential. So like, I mean, and in particular, I feel like extraordinarily ill-equipped at this moment to determine whether or not, in fact, like the stuff that IEEE has is satisfactory, in which case like this work should not be done, or have it unsatisfactory, in which case like maybe we should talk about how this work gets done. So like, I think absent some like liaison from like IEEE, like it was like, we think this is just fine, but we don't want to do it. Like I'm quite concerned about this work being charted at IETF, and I certainly don't think, and I guess other people may agree with me, but like I'm not enthusiastic about us publishing like new security protocols like on the basis of AD sponsorship, especially when they're this far out of our orbit. Yeah, I think this needs to be dispatched in some way other than like workers going to do it. I think if you do want to pursue this at IETF, like the first step would really be to have like some liaison from IEEE that like perhaps IAB can manage to like establish that this was not just duplicative work. And then you'd have to like make a case for there to be a working group. Otherwise, I think this should not like go forward.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So Robert Moskowitz.
AS1X and EAP was the liaison between JSU and IETF. XPs was popularized, and there's something as model we can use here because you experts on both sides get them with eyeballs from actual that A2 considerations are done right. We have seen those at time in the A2. So my position is process liaison and model this after the 1X EAP effort.
Bob, you're very choppy. We barely understand anything. The audio is very choppy. Nope, I think it's still very choppy. Maybe you want to type it out in the chat and we can read it out, but there's definitely some audio issue. We don't hear you.
Okay, so do the ADs have anything to add? I think that clears our queue with the exception of what we see from Robert in the chat. Roman.
Hi. So I understand the precedence, the precedent of how this was kind of AD sponsored, but based on the conversation we had and the fact that we do have a liaison, I would really be interested in at least going through the traps we did last time to talk to IEEE and if needed, kind of Wi-Fi lines to double check what makes sense here. And assuming we get the all clear, they say it's not a dupe, we could potentially revisit then this conversation about whether it makes sense to do it here in the IETF. Just got to work well with our partner SDOs.
That makes sense to me. Thank you.
All right, so it sounds like we can kind of consider this dispatched outside the IETF for the moment. And if we clear that out, then maybe we can reconsider it. Good luck chatting with the Wi-Fi Alliance and IEEE. All right, Roman, did you have something more?
Specifically in terms of taking actions, we were going to work it through our liaison to ask the question, right?
Okay.
So I guess this is another one that Ben and I will take. We'll work it through IAB. I think Russ can help us as our IEEE kind of rep, and we can figure out what to do next from there. Thanks.
That sounds good. Actually, do we have a liaison to the Wi-Fi Alliance, Roman? Because it sounded like there was some interest in that direction as well.
Question, I don't have the page in front of me. I feel like no, but we'll the IAB will help us here.
We do not.
Okay, we'll sort it out.
All right, thank you, Jerome.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Renee. Renee, do you want to share your screen and start your presentation?
Hello.
Hi, we see you. We hear you fine. Let's waiting to see your slides.
All right. So let me see.
We don't see your slides yet.
Okay. One sec. Sorry, I just came in. Okay, share. Yes. Oh. This one, I think. Do you see something now?
Yeah, we do see them. Maybe if you want to make it full screen, but otherwise we see your slides.
Yeah. Okay. So now you'll find out I'm technically incompetent. Is it full screen now?
I guess we can live with this. Just go ahead.
All right. All right. So, well, thanks for giving me the opportunity to present this. 1 sec. I'll just, yeah, let's do this. So this is about trying to squeeze more performance out of ECDSA, and ECDSA, of course, has been around forever. So I just want to highlight this, and I presented this in March at the last IETF meeting at the LAMPS working group. And so far, I think they have not included in the next charter, but I think it's of more wide applicability. So that's why I thought this would be a good venue for this. So the outline is I'd like to discuss signature schemes based on elliptic curve crypto. And as you all know, there's two schemes that are now being used in IETF protocols, mostly ECDSA, which I think is almost ubiquitous, and EDDSA, which came around roughly, I think, 3-4 years ago from this CRG effort. So I'll try to compare some performance metrics and some constraints of it. And then I'll introduce a slight tweak of it, which I indicated with this little star notion, that allows you to speed up the verification operation. And so that's item number 2, is diving into a little bit of detail. Why does it work and how do we actually make it happen? And the interesting thing is you can get the speed up without changing any on-the-wire formats. It can still be processed by a device that doesn't know about the speed ups. And that's why I think it would be of interest to the wider community. So let's have a little look here. So essentially, for a very long time, there has been only one signature scheme in town based on elliptic curves. It was ECDSA. And ECDSA is using a hash function, an elliptic curve in so-called short Weierstrass format, which has been widely standardized by NIST, by BSI, and other groups, and ANSI. And as we all know, it has a signature that has, if it's the most widely used curve, it has two 32-byte strings, R and S. And there's a certain relationship that allows you to process a signature based on the message received, this signature, and the public key of the supposed signer. The most widely used deployment is ECDSA based on this NIST curve P256 and the hash function SHA-256. So this is ECDSA, and then since about I think January 2017, we also have EDDSA. And if you just go down like to the second part of the screen, we see again the signature is like 2 components, R and S, similar to ECDSA. There's a slight difference, and that is that the second component is exactly the same, and the first component is not an integer, but it's a so-called compressed elliptic curve point. And in IETF, it has been only defined in terms of so-called adverse curves. So that was an output of the CFG group, and the RFC numbers are on the page. So I have on the next slide, I just have some comparison. So we have ECDSA. I think that's probably, yeah, it's probably used as mandatory to implement if you use elliptic curve based arithmetic for like 98% of the protocols. And EDSA is at least as huge for many applications, and it has some advantages in terms of speed. And you'll see that at the signing operation, ECDSA allows you to create a signature where you process the message only once. And with EDDSA, you have to process it twice. And another difference is that with ECDSA, you can create your so-called ephemeral signing key offline before you have received the message. So you can kind of cache those things. And in EDDSA, you do it inline. And the caveat with ECDSA is you need some kind of, some people consider it to be a little bit nasty inversion operation, but it only has to happen once. But in EDDSA, you don't have to do that. On the verification side, I think it's well known that EDDSA allows lots of speed ups, because if you, let's say you receive 20 signatures, you can receive them all you can verify them all at once by essentially solving a linear equation. And in ECDSA, supposedly that's not known to be true, because the format doesn't allow you to whip it into this shape. So actually the purpose of this presentation is to show that that perception is actually not true. And it has not been true for a long time, but it's not so widely known. So hence my presentation. So if you look at the difference between these two schemes, is you find apart from different curves that you can plug into it, you find on the wire format there's a slight difference. So you have a signature that is two components R and S, which are both integers in the ECDSA case, and in the EDDSA case you have an elliptic curve point and a signature component. And ideally, you would like to make sure that verification would also be able to reap similar benefits as EDDSA has. So that's why I introduced something on the next slide. So it's a slight tweak of ECDSA, where instead of the first component of the signature, this small r, you send a compressed elliptic curve point. And if you look under the hood, you will find out that verification actually is now allows all the tricks that you can apply with EDDSA. And as you probably saw from the previous slide, I'll just jump back to it. It said no speed up possible with ECDSA. And now here, if you look at the third column, you can suddenly speed up single verifications and batch verifications. And actually, I'll put it down also on the last slide, but the speed up for single verification has been around for at least 16.5 years, and for batch verification has been known since 1994. But for whatever reason, it has never really caught on too much in the wider community. And I think it would be a good moment to consider whether we should change that. So here I just look at the difference between the regular ECDSA scheme and this one with a little tweak. So it's just highlighted here on the slide. So instead of having a signature that is a pair of integers, you have a signature that is elliptic curve point and a signature component S here. And the verification operation is slightly different, but the interesting thing is that both signatures are valid under exactly the same conditions. So you don't lose or gain any security by moving from one version to the other. And all the speed ups, and they're really quite considerable. So for a single verification, you get about a 30% increased speed. If you have the second version with a little star notation. And if you have enough signatures that you have to verify at once, for example, a certificate chain, then you can get the speed up of about factor 6. And all these speed ups are based on essentially some algebraic operations that allow you to identify common terms and put some scalars in, get them in the right form, and you can also centralize some so-called ECC doubling operations, Instead of having that to get in and out individually for each signature, you can just do it at once. And that's actually the background for this speed up. And the only difference, the only caveat here is like, how do you actually make this work? How do you make it work while still not using introducing an other signature scheme? And that is based on the following. So in ECDSA, this signature component R is the x-coordinate of an ephemeral signing key. And in order to reap all these benefits of speed ups, you have to be able to reverse that operation. And in general, that's not really possible because there's always two solutions, a point and the negative of the point. But ECDSA has a very nice property. It's at one time it had been considered as a disadvantage, but it's called malleability, and that is you can change the signature so that you can predict the y-coordinate of this ephemeral signing key. And once you can do that, you get a one-to-one correspondence between the signature component and the ephemeral signing key, and essentially you're in the ECDSA situation. So that's in the green box. So the recipe that I would like to advocate moving forward is we just keep generating ECDSA signatures as we have been doing for the last 25 years. And if we want to reap some of these benefits, we want to make sure that we manipulate the signature itself in such a way that the reverse operation of mapping from the ephemeral signing key to the R component is unique. And this is based on the property that if a signature is valid, then you can essentially take the negative of the second component of the signature. And the effect of that is that you change the parity of the y-coordinate of the signing key. So by doing that, you can put signatures always in the form where, let's say, the y-coordinate always has even parity, so it ends with a 0 bit. And any party can do that, so it doesn't have to be the signer. For example, if you got a certificate and it was signed by, let's say, VeriSign or DigiCert or whatever, you don't have to go back to them, get another certificate generated. You can do it yourself because this property is independent of the signer. And so remember that this really had performance advantages for the verification side. And the question is like, how do you actually get there? And there's various ways of doing that. So one of them is you look at the whole universe of ECDSA signatures that has been generated since 25 years ago. You can just all put them in a shape so that you can do this operation that you can recover uniquely the signing key from the signature component. So this is step 2 from the previous slide. So you can essentially put a whole universe of existing deployments in the proper shape, and from that moment say, oh, I'll just introduce, generate them only that way, and then any device that wishes to implement speedups, they can do so, and they don't have any uncertainty whether that particular format was already there. So that's what they call the Big Bang approach. And depending on the specification, so there's some specifications that are still evolving and there's no deployment yet. You can do exactly the same thing. But you just specify in a certain section of the document, say like, oh, you have just to always incorporate the step 2 of the previous slide. And so the interesting thing is really that it doesn't really impact existing verifiers. So that's with option 3. So if we can also introduce a new label for this variant. and essentially it always flags that it has been generated in a way that fosters speedy verifications. It doesn't really have any impact on existing verifiers that verify a hash of the message, the signature, and the signing key. So those are ways to do it. And I just also wanted to highlight how can we use it in various specifications. So essentially we can use it across the board, not only in IETF, but everywhere, without having to recertify things and generating new certificates. So I gave an example here with PKIX, one with OpenPGP, and OpenPGP is still an existing draft, for example. And another one is the so-called Lake protocol. And essentially, just introducing a new label for this verification-friendly formatting would be enough. So in the first case, it's as stated, which I called ECDSA star with SHA-256, if it would be, let's say, the P256 curve. And then you can add some language also what happens to devices that don't understand this particular new label, and that's in the draft that I submitted 2 weeks ago. In OpenPGP, you can just add this ECDSA version as a suite in a particular table. So that's what's listed here on half the page. And for example, the Lake protocol, ad hoc, you can just stipulate that you will always generate the ECDSA signatures in this particular way. So the only thing you really do is, if you just go back to slide number 8, is that you flip the second signature component and make it plus or minus this component S, depending on the parity of the Y coordinates of verbal key. So it doesn't really have any real impact on the computational complexity, but obviously it requires a little bit of work if you would implement in such a way that that bit would not be widely available.
Renee, quick time check. We have about 5 minutes left, and I'd like to have a few minutes for discussion. So
yes. So I'm on the last slide already. So, but thank you. So so this trick has been used for about a decade in vehicular applications. So the IEEE P1609 protocol, but it could easily be used far more widely, and that's why I think it would be a good idea to consider it. And devices, the important thing is devices don't have to implement this particular speed up. So if for whatever reason they don't want to do it, they can still do whatever they have already been doing. And the effort required in implementing this in IETF terms, in writing specifications and so on, should be pretty quick, because the main requirement is, of course, to kind of put in the document what I presented, which I already did, and define some code points. I think that's about it. I already mentioned that the techniques have been around for more than 2 decades for people who care about the year time window. The question is, should we take this on? Discussion.
Please.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say, I think we should go to part B, because I don't think that folk are going to have the confidence to use it unless it's had examination there. And of course, that's IRTF, not us.
Mm-hmm.
Benjamin?
This is maybe not relevant to the dispatch question, but I was not sure I understood. When you're doing the batch verification that gets a speed up, is the only constraint that all the signatures need to be on the same curve and using ECDSA star? there's no requirement on the same signer or anything like that?
Oh, well, yeah, so the speed up of a factor 6, I think it's, it depends a little bit on which platform, of course, but the factor 6 speed up you would get if the signer would be the same for a bunch of signatures. And if the signers would be different, then the speed up would be lower, but it would still be in roughly the 2.5 to 3 times speed up ballpark.
Okay, thank you.
Daniel?
Hi, thanks for bringing this up. I'm just, this is Daniel Kahn-Gilmore. I'm one of the co-chairs of the OpenPGP working group. We are working on the crypto refresh draft, as you know there. I would not be inclined to include this in the OpenPGP working group without an endorsement from a group like CFRG. There are also additional sort of store and forward questions that we need to think about for, you know, certificates that sign using mechanisms that other people might not be able to interpret. But I really think that putting this into some place like CFRG first to establish that this is a, you know, this is a sensible approach would make things easier for groups like OpenPGP to adopt it.
And so just as a feedback, so you think the role of CFRG would be because of some uncertainty regarding security properties, or what?
I mean, I haven't looked into this in enough detail to be confident that I understand what the trade-offs are here. So yeah, CFRG would be, and I don't know who else in the OpenPGP working group would have looked at it as well, but a review from the CFRG that endorses this as a reasonable approach, and and highlights the potential implementation problems that people might have. That would be useful for me to consider, it as part of the work for OpenPGP. Yeah. So yeah, CFRG's endorsement, even if all they're saying is this is a reasonable approach, don't worry about it, would be useful.
Okay, so I think it would actually be definitely would be useful to have a, let's say, crypto review panel review or some discussion on the mailing list as well, right? Yeah. But the actual work itself would mostly be defining code points, right? I see your point.
I mean, from OpenPGP's perspective, defining a code point is easy, but figuring out how to get it deployed is much harder, and that's maybe outside of the scope of the IETF. But introducing new signing code points that implementations don't have the ability to verify is an awkward multi-year process for OpenPGP.
Yeah, I think that came up also in the last discussion in March. And if you will actually dig into the draft document, there's a section 4 and discusses what happens with devices that don't know the new label yet, right? The new OID or whatever it is, right? And definitely I see that as it is something that needs to be taken into account. And obviously you have to start somewhere. If you want to effectuate change, you first have to get a mechanism out there. And then the other one is how do you make sure that you transition? That's why I called also that section in my presentation, transitioning to this new presentation, right? Yeah. Thanks.
So we're over time at this point, so let's take the next few as quickly as we can. I think Rich is next.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll keep it short. I think it should be dispatched to CFRG and have them review it and move forward. Thanks.
Okay,
Yeah,
Richard.
I was just going to basically plus one that this is a big enough change that it, as a dumb implementer, it requires me to like break the seal on my cryptographic library and tinker around with signatures, and that's kind of my trigger of saying this needs real cryptographers to look at it. So yeah, the code points can be assigned eventually, but I think before this actually gets any uptake, it needs CFRG review. So I would propose that we dispatch our dispatch outcome here for dispatch be know that the IETF is not going to work on this for now, but yeah, I think this would make a fine thing to propose to CFRG or even to the independent stream.
Yeah, I strongly endorse that kind of position. We have two different things here. We have some code point assignments, but the core thing is we have a body of work we probably send to the crypto review panel that's general purpose. And if that's the threshold, we really should take this to the IETF, and then we can, at a later point, figure out how to get the code points assigned for it so we have the confidence in the approach here. Thanks.
Yeah, so the only caveat I see is, as a, you know, since I submitted it here, is that if you require code points, the IETF usually doesn't assign any code points, right? So it becomes two efforts, and I just thought it would be nice if this would be a short effort, where obviously it requires insights from the CFG and the ability to get those code points out of the door, essentially, right?
Yeah, I think this is just an ordering point that before when we assign code points, we want them to be on well-vetted things. And so I think the feedback I'm hearing from the room is this needs a little bit more vetting before we go to that step of assigning the code points.
Sure.
All right, sounds like we have a dispatch outcome here. Thank you. Thanks, Renee.
Thank you.
Yes, we are off to the last presentation for today. Brett, do you want to share your screen and present, or?
Yes, I can try and share my screen here. Yes. All right, I assume you can see the slides.
Yeah, we do.
Thanks for giving me some time to talk today. This quick presentation will be about JWS clear text JSON signatures, or you could rephrase this to be plain text JSON signatures. I want to preface this with our original intent is to go through the ISE, but we were asked to present this at Dispatch, and we did that this morning. And then I guess we were also put on the agenda today in Secdispatch. And so I'm just going to go through this presentation, but our original request was to go through ISE. And so in fact, I know that was a lot of chatter this morning in Dispatch, so I thought I would just bring that up right up front. So from the abstract standpoint, this gives us the option it describes a method for extending the JSON web signature standard. We've called it JWS CT, and it's combining the detached mode of JWS with the JSON canonical scheme, or JCS, which is RFC 8785. And so you can maintain your signed JSON data in actual JSON format. And some of the reasons and rationale for this, or the use cases for this, or user stories, as in many situations, JSON data structures are really well defined, and to have an option to add the signature without packaging the data inside the signature is really important to improve backwards compatibility and adoption of the signed data. There's also very large data structures in JSON format that are shared across the ecosystem and between organizations. And then the use case or the desire is to be able to sign those and sign them actually at a later stage, possibly after they've been shared. So they would be sent as a detached signature. They could also be attached embedded, and a lot of the examples will show them embedded inside the JSON data itself, but this is really designed so they could be signed separately. And then adding multiple signatures and nested data structures, in different combinations is significantly easier to handle when the signature is packaged within the data and not the other way around. And then, wanting to be able to do, countersigning and be able to have multiple people sign the same data is another use case. And then if needed, wanting, to transmit unsigned data, it is easy to omit the signature instead of creating a JWS package and then using the none algorithm. And then lastly, is just maintaining JSON data as it is while in transport, and makes readability and debugging easier, and is much more friendly for the Web 2.0 world. So the constructs and the way this would work, So in traditional JCS and RFC 8785, you have your readable format of JSON data, and then you create a canonical version of that. It's still 100% valid JSON. It is limited to the iJSON specification, but a lot of implementations of JSON actually are restricted to the iJSON format, which is a separate RFC. So classical JWS signatures, this is just level set and bring everybody up to speed. The first part of it is, they're all separated by dots. So the first part is the header. And the next part is going to be your data. And then the last part is the signature. And it's all base 64 encoded. And then the detached signature in normal JWS land, you can see that the payload is missing between the two dots. So the way we propose this to be done, and would like to see this done, is you have your initial JSON object. Obviously, in most implementations, these objects would be very, very large and contain a lot of properties. But for sake of illustration, we've just shown it with 2 properties here. The next stage would be to canonicalize that data using RFC 8785 and put it into a canonical format. Then you would generate a JWS string, and then you could turn around and you could assemble that into your object. Now, we purposefully did not define what the signature property would be inside of the JSON data, because the implementations would define that inside their own ecosystem. And what we're really focused on is talking about how the signature is created, and then how it would be added to an existing JSON blob of data, and then how you could countersign that, or how multiple organizations could sign that, or potentially how you could create an entire signature object and send that as a separate payload. The verification process in reverse is you're going to capture the JSON data, assuming that it was embedded, or if it was a separate JSON signature object like that you had created inside of your ecosystem or your trust group. You've defined all those extra properties. And you're going to fetch out the signature property string that was included in that property. You're going to remove that property from the payload of the JSON data, and then you're going to run it through canonicalization, and then you'll be able to go through and do the validation, and then you'll be able to see whether or not the digital signature is valid, and be able to do those comparisons. So like I mentioned, we don't dictate what the property or the signature attribute is or where it's located. That would really be up to the ecosystem and trust group that is using this. There was some people this morning that requested, well, maybe that should be defined. I think you can have very strong use cases for why you wouldn't, but while you'd leave it up to the organizations and entities and trust groups and stuff like that to define that for themselves. And the document does not define counter signatures or arrays of signatures or detached signatures, but it exemplifies on how it could be done. So we show some examples of ways that you could actually create an array of signatures, the way you could do counter signatures, you could do separate detached signatures. But what we're really focused on is using the detached method and showing how you can use a lot of the work that was already done in the IETF and be able to use it in plain text JSON. For the path forward, we would suggest or would request that this work be moved under the ISE. It is based upon JSON canonical scheme, which is 8785, and that was also published through the independent stream. And then the Jose working group is not active, and the list has previously expressed limited to no interest in doing any additional work there. So we felt like that would probably be the best option and the best solution. But like I said, we were asked to present this, and so we're trying to follow all the process and follow all the rules and get everybody's feedback. And so, if you have questions or opinions about this, or if you read through the draft and you have ideas for other things, or maybe examples that we didn't illustrate well enough, we'd love to hear from that or hear from you and be able to add that so it can be the best quality draft that we can produce.
Brett, so it looks like we have Richard first in the queue.
Yeah, just to clear up one process point. The independent stream is independent, so there's process-wise no need to come to this group. The ISE is welcome to impose whatever bars he does, but I think you should feel free to submit to him to the ISE, and there's no need for dispatch to sign off on that. Just
right. That was my interpretation as well. We were asked to present at dispatch and then at Secdispatch, and so we did what we were asked to do. So. But we'd love for you to read the draft and provide any feedback. So,
I guess, Brett, to clarify, you were asked by the ISE to present here. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thanks.
Okay, so for the ISC, it might just be that he would like additional reviews. So if anyone is interested to provide reviews on list would be helpful as they conduct their process.
Okay, thanks. I guess we are done with the presentations for today. Should we quickly go through the dispatch decisions and close the meeting? Richard, do you want to do that?
I think Richard had to drop early, so do you have that handy? Oh, he's there. Nope, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Richard.
I am actually here, and I can come on for the next couple of minutes. So I can read back through my notes. So let's see. So on Mallory's draft, I think we came to the conclusion we're going to form a new mailing list and have some discussion there to refine scoping before we take a firm action on it. On the SNMP upgrade to TLS 1.3, the ADs are going to check with the ops aides and see if there's a slot for it in some community that knows SNMP better, to which we can add some TLS expertise. So that has been dispatched to the ADs to figure out whether this goes to some existing thing or to some new working group. On OWE, we're going to take no action in the IETF. The ADs will work with our liaisons to IEEE and Wi-Fi Alliance to figure out if there's a home over there for it. On Renee's ECDSA star proposal, we are also not going to take any action. I think the impression we got from several folks is that if there was going to be any IETF action, such as code point assignments, we would need CFRG endorsement. So no action in the IETF, encouragement to submit CFRG. Finally, on the JWT plain text signatures or embedded signatures, whatever we're going to call it, I didn't hear any objections to that going into the ISE. So that's what I've got in my notes. Any last comments?
Matches the notes I took.
Thank you, Russ, for taking the notes. Thanks a lot. I guess we are done for today. It's 3:50 a.m. where I am, so.
Thanks for staying up with us, Mohit.
Thank you all. Thank you, Mohit. Have a good night or a day or whatever.
Bye, everyone.